Last night, in bedrooms around the world, how many couples lay with their backs turned to each other, feeling lonelier than when they were single? How many whispered into the darkness, "Why does the person I love most hurt me the most?" If you're listening to this right now, you probably know that feeling. The feeling when "I love you" sounds more like a plea than a whisper. When holding each other feels forced. When you look into their eyes and wonder, where did we lose each other? I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. 2,500 years ago, a man sitting under the Bodhi tree discovered a secret about love, a secret that to this day, 99% of us still don't know. Not a secret about finding the right person or saying the right words, but a secret about how to love without getting hurt, how to bond without becoming chains. Today, that very secret has saved countless marriages on the brink of collapse, has transformed arguments into healing conversations, has changed how couples see each other, not as enemies in the same house, but as companions on the same journey. Do you believe that the person sitting next to you right now, no matter how angry they make you, no matter how distant you've become, could still become the person who loves you most deeply, understands you best, and comforts you most in this lifetime? Close your eyes and remember the first moment you knew you loved them. Wasn't it true that back then, you felt like the whole world made sense? Didn't you think that love would always be that easy? That feeling is still there. It's just been covered by misunderstandings about the true nature of love. Misunderstandings that society taught us, that movies told us, that even our families passed down from generation to generation. In the next 120 minutes, we're going to peel away those layers of misunderstanding together. We're going to dive into the stories of ordinary people like you and me who found their way back to true love. And most importantly, you'll have concrete tools to start healing your relationship today. Because real love, love as the Buddha understood it, isn't an emotion but a skill. Not luck, but choice. Not something you find, but something you create. Picture this. What if every fight could become an opportunity to understand each other deeper? What if every moment of distance could become a bridge to greater intimacy? What if the very things that frustrate you about your partner today could become the doorways to falling in love all over again? This isn't fantasy. This isn't wishful thinking. This is what happens when you understand the ancient practice of loving kindness, not just as a nice idea, but as a revolutionary way of being in relationship. Whether you've been together for months or decades, whether you're hanging by a thread or just want to go deeper, the next 2 hours will change how you love forever. Your journey back to love starts right now. There's a moment in every relationship crisis when the pain becomes so unbearable that something inside us breaks open. Not breaks apart, breaks open. Like a seed that can only sprout when its shell cracks under pressure. Have you been there? That moment when you're willing to try anything, believe anything, if it means finding a way back to love. This is where every great love story really begins. Not with the first kiss or the wedding day, but with that moment of desperate seeking. When two people realize that everything they thought they knew about love isn't working, and they're ready to learn something new. Picture a couple. Let's call them Sarah and Michael, though they could be any names, any faces, any two hearts that have loved and lost their way. They've tried everything the world told them to try. They've read the relationship books, attended the workshops, learned the communication techniques. They've practiced active listening and used I statements and scheduled date nights. And still, somehow, they're drifting further apart. Sarah lies awake at 3 a.m. wondering when Michael stopped seeing her, really seeing her. When did his eyes start looking through her instead of at her? When did his touch become automatic instead of tender? And Michael, for his part, feels like he's failing at the one thing that should come naturally. He loves her, doesn't he? So why does every conversation feel like walking through a minefield? They're not bad people. They're not even incompatible people. They're just two human beings who've been taught that love is supposed to be easy, and when it gets hard, they must be doing something wrong. Sound familiar? This is the crossroads where every couple eventually arrives. The place where you either give up and drift into resignation, or you begin to seek something deeper, something ancient, something that your grandmother's grandmother might have known but somehow got lost along the way. Take a breath with me here. Feel your own heart beating. How many times has it beaten since you started listening? And in each of those beats, your heart has been practicing something profound, something the Buddha called metta, loving kindness. Your heart doesn't decide to beat only when you're happy with yourself. It doesn't withhold its rhythm when you make mistakes. It simply continues, steadily, faithfully, offering you life with each pulse. This is where the discovery begins, not with fixing your partner, not with being fixed yourself, but with understanding that love, real love, works more like your heartbeat than like your emotions. Now, in this moment of seeking, something beautiful happens. When a student is ready, the teacher appears. Not always in the form we expect. Sometimes it's an elderly neighbor who mentions something their grandfather once told them. Sometimes it's a book that falls open to the right page. Sometimes it's a conversation overheard in a coffee shop. But for seekers throughout history, wisdom has often come in the form of an ancient teaching that has survived precisely because it works. Not just for monks in monasteries, but for ordinary people trying to love each other in the midst of ordinary life. The teaching is this: you cannot give what you do not have. You cannot love another human being in a healthy, sustainable way if you haven't first learned to extend that same loving kindness to yourself. Most of us recoil when we hear this. But that's selfish, we protest. I should think of my partner first. Love means sacrifice. And yes, love does involve sacrifice. But here's what the Buddha understood that most of us miss. You can't sacrifice what you don't possess. You can't give water from an empty well. Sarah and Michael's journey, like the journey of every couple who finds their way back to love, began with a shocking realization. They weren't failing at love because they weren't loving each other enough. They were failing because they had never learned to love themselves, not in a narcissistic, selfish way, but in the fundamental way that makes all other love possible. Think about it this way. How do you speak to yourself in your own mind? When you make a mistake, what's the tone of your internal voice? When you look in the mirror, what thoughts arise? For most of us, the answer is uncomfortable. We speak to ourselves with a harshness we would never inflict on a stranger, let alone someone we love. And here's the profound truth. However you relate to yourself is exactly how you'll eventually relate to everyone else. If you're critical and demanding with yourself, you'll become critical and demanding with your partner. If you can't forgive your own mistakes, you'll struggle to forgive theirs. If you're constantly trying to fix and improve yourself, you'll end up trying to fix and improve them. This isn't psychology. This is ancient wisdom. The Buddha taught that loving kindness must begin with the self, not as an end point, but as a starting point. Like learning to swim before you can save someone else from drowning. So here, at the beginning of all healing, is the first invitation. What would change in your relationship if you started treating yourself the way you would treat a dear friend going through exactly what you're going through? Pause with me here. Put your hand on your heart. Feel it beating. And whisper these words, even if they feel foreign. May I be kind to myself in this moment. May I be patient with my own learning. May I forgive myself for not knowing what I didn't know. This is where transformation begins. Not with grand gestures or perfect words, but with the simple revolutionary act of extending to yourself the same loving kindness you hope to receive from others. There's a reason every airplane safety demonstration tells you to put on your own oxygen mask before helping others. It's not selfishness, it's wisdom. You can't save anyone if you're unconscious. The same principle applies to love, though somehow we've forgotten this fundamental truth. We've been taught to pour ourselves out for others, to put their needs first, to sacrifice our own well-being for the sake of love. And while generosity and care are beautiful qualities, they become toxic when they come from emptiness rather than fullness. The Buddha discovered something revolutionary about love that still challenges everything our culture teaches us. He found that loving kindness, what he called metta in his language, isn't just a nice feeling you have toward others. It's a practice, a skill, a way of being that must first be cultivated within yourself before it can authentically flow toward anyone else. Imagine trying to light someone else's candle when your own flame has gone out. Imagine trying to fill their cup when yours has run dry. This is what most of us are trying to do in our relationships. Give love we haven't first received, offer compassion we haven't shown ourselves, provide understanding we've never extended to our own hearts. Let me tell you about a woman. She could be your neighbor, your sister, your own reflection in the mirror. She's been married for years, and she's tired. Not just physically tired, though she is that too. She's tired of trying so hard to be the perfect partner. Tired of managing everyone else's emotions while ignoring her own. Tired of giving and giving until she feels like there's nothing left. She lies in bed at night making mental lists of all the ways she's fallen short that day. She should have been more patient when her husband was stressed about work. She should have listened better when he was telling her about his day. She should have initiated more physical affection. She should have. Does this sound familiar? This is what happens when we try to love without first learning loving kindness toward ourselves. We become harsh taskmasters, not just to ourselves, but inevitably to those we love. Because how you treat yourself is the template for how you'll treat everyone else. But here's what she didn't understand, what most of us don't understand. Her exhaustion wasn't coming from loving too much. It was coming from trying to manufacture love from an empty source. Like trying to pour water from a pitcher that's been bone dry for years. The Buddha taught something that sounds almost too simple to be profound. As a mother protects her only child, so should you protect and nurture your own heart with loving kindness. Not as the final destination, but as the foundation for all other love. What does this actually look like? It looks like speaking to yourself the way you would speak to a beloved friend. It looks like forgiving your own mistakes with the same grace you'd offer to someone you care about. It looks like treating your own needs not as selfish inconveniences, but as legitimate and worthy of attention. Most importantly, it looks like understanding that you are not your mistakes, your bad moods, your difficult days, or your imperfections. You are a human being doing your best with the awareness and tools you currently have. And that's enough. You're enough. Take a moment to let that sink in. You're enough. Not when you fix this problem, or overcome that habit, or finally get your relationship perfect. Right now, in this moment, with all your beautiful imperfections and works in progress, you are enough. This isn't just feel-good psychology. This is the foundation of sustainable love. Because when you truly know in your bones that you are worthy of kindness, especially your own kindness, something magical happens. You stop needing your partner to constantly validate your worth. You stop taking their bad moods personally. You stop trying to control their feelings to manage your own anxiety. Instead, you begin to love from a place of fullness rather than need. You offer care because you have care to give, not because you need care in return. You become a refuge for your partner instead of another source of demand. But here's the beautiful paradox. When you stop needing your partner to fill your emptiness, they often naturally start wanting to fill your fullness. When you stop demanding their attention, they begin offering it freely. When you stop trying to fix them, they start feeling safe enough to heal themselves. This is the first secret of loving kindness. It always begins at home, in the relationship with yourself. And it begins with a simple but radical shift in how you speak to your own heart. Instead of, "Why did I say that stupid thing?" try, "I'm learning, and learning involves mistakes." Instead of, "I'm so bad at this," try, "I'm growing, and growth takes time." Instead of, "I should be better by now," try, "I'm exactly where I need to be in my journey." These aren't just affirmations, they're acts of rebellion against a culture that profits from your self-doubt. They're declarations of independence from the voices that tell you you're not enough. They're the first steps in building the inner foundation that can support not just your own well-being, but the love you want to create with another person. Close your eyes for a moment. Breathe deeply. And feel what it might be like to be truly gentle with yourself. Not permissive, not indulgent, but genuinely kind. Feel what it might be like to be your own best friend instead of your own worst critic. This is where all healing begins. This is where all love finds its source. In in the tender, revolutionary act of extending to yourself the same loving kindness you long to receive from the world. Now let me share with you a story that has been passed down for over 2,000 years, not because it's a nice tale, but because it reveals something profound about the nature of love and how we respond when that love is tested. There once lived a monk named Sariputta, renowned throughout the land, not for his ability to perform miracles or his eloquent speeches, but for something far more challenging, his unshakable loving kindness. People would travel great distances just to witness what true patience looked like in human form. Rumors spread that nothing could disturb Sariputta's peace. No insult could anger him, no provocation could shake his composure, no attack could diminish his compassion. To many, this seemed impossible. Surely everyone has a breaking point. One man decided to test this claim. He was skeptical, perhaps even cynical about such things. No one is that patient, he thought. Everyone has limits. I'll find his. So one morning, as Sariputta walked peacefully through the village on his daily rounds, this man approached from behind. Without warning, he struck Sariputta forcefully between the shoulder blades, sending the gentle monk tumbling forward onto the dusty ground. The crowd that had gathered gasped in shock. Surely now they would see anger flash in the monk's eyes. Surely now they would witness retaliation, or at the very least, wounded pride demanding an explanation. But what happened next has echoed through centuries because it reveals something revolutionary about how love responds to attack. Sariputta slowly rose, brushed the dust from his robes, and turned to face his attacker. And then he smiled. Not a forced smile, not a passive-aggressive smirk, but a genuinely warm, understanding smile. He looked directly into the man's eyes and said gently, "Thank you for this teaching, friend. May you be well and happy." Then he simply continued on his way, leaving the man standing there in stunned silence. The attacker ran after him, falling to his knees in the dusty road. "Master, please forgive me. I have done something terrible. I tested your patience in the worst possible way." Sariputta knelt down to meet the man at eye level. "My friend," he said softly, "there is nothing to forgive. You have given me a gift, the opportunity to practice what I believe. And besides, you did not hurt me. You revealed your own pain. Happy people don't attack others. Only those who are suffering strike out. May you find peace for whatever brought you to this moment. Now, before you dismiss this as an impossible standard, I could never respond like that. Let me tell you what this story really teaches us about love and relationships. This wasn't about Sariputta being superhuman. This was about him understanding something most of us have forgotten. When someone attacks us, they're not really attacking us. They're expressing their own inner turmoil, their own pain, their own struggle with feeling unloved or misunderstood. Think about the last time your partner snapped at you. Were they really angry about the dishes in the sink, or were they overwhelmed by work stress and feeling unsupported? Were they really frustrated with your driving, or were they carrying anxiety about something completely unrelated? Most of our relationship conflicts aren't actually about what they appear to be about. They're about two people who are struggling in some way, trying to communicate their needs through the limited vocabulary of whatever emotions they're able to access in that moment. Sariputta understood this. He could see past the attack to the pain beneath it. He could respond to what was actually happening, a suffering person acting out, rather than reacting to the surface behavior. This doesn't mean becoming a doormat or accepting abuse. It means developing the wisdom to see clearly what's really going on, and the love to respond from that clarity rather than from your own triggered emotions. In your relationship, this might look like pausing when your partner is being difficult and asking yourself, what might they be struggling with right now? How can I respond to their pain rather than react to their behavior? It might mean saying, I can see you're upset about something. I want to understand. Help me help you, instead of defending yourself or attacking back. It might mean recognizing that when your partner is hardest to love, that's often when they need love the most. This is the practical application of loving kindness in relationship. Not perfect patience or saintly tolerance, but the wisdom to see past surface behaviors to the human heart underneath. The courage to respond with love even when love isn't being offered to you. Because here's what Sariputta knew that transformed even his attacker. Love is not conditional on being loved in return. Kindness is not dependent on receiving kindness. Compassion is not earned through perfect behavior. Love, real love, is a choice you make regardless of circumstances. And that choice has the power to transform not just your own heart, but the heart of anyone who encounters it. This is the secret that can save any relationship. Learn to see the pain behind the behavior and respond to that pain with love. What if I told you that everything you've been taught about love is incomplete? Not wrong necessarily, but incomplete. Like trying to build a house with only one wall, or attempting to play a symphony with just one instrument. Most of us have been taught that love is one thing: romantic attraction, deep affection, passionate connection. But the ancient wisdom keepers knew something we've forgotten. Love isn't one thing. It's four. Picture love as a magnificent temple that has stood for thousands of years, weathering every storm, surviving every earthquake, enduring through wars and peace, through human joy and human sorrow. This temple stands not because it was built carelessly or quickly, but because it rests on four unshakable pillars. Remove any one of these pillars, and the entire structure becomes unstable. But when all four are strong and balanced, the temple of love becomes virtually indestructible. The Buddha, in his profound understanding of the human heart, identified these four pillars over 500 years ago. He called them the Brahma Viharas, the divine abodes, the heavenly dwellings of the heart. But don't let the ancient language fool you. These aren't mystical concepts meant only for monks and spiritual seekers. These are the practical, day-to-day foundations of every relationship that not only survives but thrives. Imagine Sarah and Michael again, the couple we met earlier. Like most couples, they thought love was just one thing, that feeling of being drawn to each other, that spark of attraction, that sense of knowing they belong together. And when that one feeling began to fluctuate, as all feelings do, they panicked. They thought love was leaving. But what they didn't realize is that they had been trying to build their entire relationship on just one pillar when four were available to them. Let me take you through each of these 4 pillars, not as abstract concepts, but as living, breathing foundations for the love you want to create in your own life. The first pillar is metta, loving kindness. This is love without conditions, love without demands, love that says, I want you to be happy, without adding, because it will make me happy too. It's the love a mother feels for her child when that child is screaming in the grocery store, not because the behavior is pleasant, but because the love exists independent of behavior. Think about this for a moment. When did you last love your partner completely independent of what they could do for you? When did you last look at them and feel genuine care for their happiness without any thought of return? This isn't about becoming a doormat or abandoning your own needs. It's about discovering that place in your heart where love exists for its own sake. I know a couple, let's call them David and Maria, who discovered this kind of love after 15 years of what they thought was a happy marriage. David had always been proud of how much he loved Maria, how much he did for her, how devoted he was. But one day, during an argument about something trivial, Maria said something that stopped him in his tracks. David, you love me because I make you feel good about yourself. But what happens when I can't do that anymore? The question haunted him because he realized it was true. His love had always been conditional on her appreciation, her affection, her ability to make him feel valued. It wasn't really love for Maria. It was love for how Maria made him feel about himself. That realization could have destroyed their marriage. Instead, it transformed it. David began the practice of loving kindness meditation, starting each morning by silently wishing Maria happiness, health, and peace, not because it would benefit him, but simply because she deserved to be happy. The change in their relationship was subtle but profound. Maria began to feel truly loved for who she was, not for what she provided. And paradoxically, as David stopped loving her conditionally, she naturally began wanting to show him more affection, more appreciation, more care. This is the magic of metta. When you love someone without condition, they feel safe enough to love you back freely. The second pillar is karuna, compassion. If loving kindness is wanting someone to be happy, compassion is wanting someone to be free from suffering. More than that, it's the willingness to stay present with their pain without trying to fix it, change it, or make it go away. We live in a culture that's deeply uncomfortable with suffering. When someone we love is in pain, our first instinct is often to try to solve their problem, give them advice, or distract them from their discomfort. But true compassion requires something much more challenging, the courage to simply witness suffering with love. Think about the last time your partner was going through something difficult. Did you rush in with solutions? Did you try to cheer them up? Did you feel frustrated when they didn't take your advice? These are natural responses, but they often come from our own discomfort with their pain rather than from genuine compassion. True compassion looks different. It sounds like, I can see you're hurting. I'm here with you. You don't have to carry this alone. It looks like sitting quietly while they cry, holding space for their anger without taking it personally, being present with their fear without rushing to reassure them that everything will be fine. There's a story of a woman whose husband was diagnosed with a serious illness. Her first response was to spring into action, researching treatments, organizing appointments, creating meal plans, rallying family support. She was doing all the right things, but something was wrong. Her husband seemed to withdraw more each day. Finally, he said to her, "I know you're trying to help, but I feel like you're trying to fix me. What I really need is for someone to just sit with me in this scary place and not try to make it better." That night, she stopped researching and planning. She simply sat with him on their couch, holding his hand in silence. For the first time since the diagnosis, he cried. And for the first time, she cried with him, instead of trying to stop his tears. It was in that moment of shared vulnerability that they found their way back to each other. Compassion isn't about having answers. It's about having presence. It's about being willing to enter into someone else's suffering, not to rescue them from it, but to ensure they don't face it alone. The third pillar is mudita, appreciative joy. This might be the most challenging pillar for modern couples because it requires us to overcome one of humanity's most persistent demons, jealousy and comparison. Mudita is the ability to feel genuine happiness for someone else's joy, success, or good fortune. In a relationship, it's being able to celebrate your partner's victories without any shadow of envy, to feel proud of their accomplishments without wondering what it means about you, to encourage their dreams even when they don't directly benefit you. How often do we truly celebrate our partner's happiness without some small voice asking, "But what about me?" When they get a promotion, are we genuinely thrilled, or do we worry about how it might change our dynamic? When they spend time with friends and come home energized and joyful, do we celebrate that energy, or do we feel slightly left out? Consider Jake and Emma, a couple in their 40s. Emma had always wanted to learn to paint, but between career and family, she'd never found the time. When their youngest child started school, she finally enrolled in art classes. At first, Jake was supportive. It seemed like a nice hobby. But as Emma's passion grew, as she started spending more time painting, as she began talking about her art teacher and her classmates with obvious joy, Jake found himself feeling increasingly resentful. "She's happier with her paints than she is with me," he confided to a friend. "She lights up when she talks about art in a way she hasn't lit up about our relationship in years." The friend, who happened to understand something about loving kindness, asked Jake a simple question: "Do you love Emma?" "Of course I do." "Then why aren't you happy that she's happy?" That question changed everything for Jake. He realized he had been viewing Emma's joy as competition rather than celebration. He had been so focused on being the source of her happiness that he couldn't simply enjoy the fact that she was happy. Jake began practicing mudita, consciously celebrating Emma's artistic journey. He surprised her with art supplies, asked genuine questions about her classes, and even arranged a small showing of her work for friends and family. The more he celebrated her joy, the more joyful she became, and the more that joy spilled over into their relationship. This is the gift of mudita. When you can genuinely celebrate your partner's happiness, they want to share more of that happiness with you. The fourth and final pillar is upekkha, equanimity. This is perhaps the most misunderstood of the four pillars because many people mistake it for indifference or emotional detachment. But true equanimity isn't about not caring. It's about caring so deeply that you can love without controlling. Equanimity is the wisdom that allows you to love your partner completely, while still allowing them to be themselves completely. It's the difference between saying, "I love you, and I need you to be different," and "I love you and I trust you to be exactly who you are." Most relationship conflict comes from our attempts to control our partner's thoughts, feelings, choices, or behaviors. We love them, but we love them with conditions. I love you when you're happy. I love you when you agree with me. I love you when you want the same things I want. Equanimity asks us to love without those conditions. Not because we don't have preferences or needs, but because we understand that trying to control another person is both impossible and ultimately destructive to love. Think about Lisa and Tom, married for 12 years. Lisa was naturally optimistic and outgoing. Tom was more introspective and cautious. For years, Lisa tried to help Tom be more social, more spontaneous, more like her. She'd push him to attend parties he didn't enjoy, encourage him to be more talkative in groups, and feel disappointed when he couldn't match her energy level. Tom, feeling constantly critiqued and inadequate, began to withdraw even further. The more Lisa pushed, the more he pulled away. Their love was genuine, but it was suffocating under the weight of Lisa's need to change him. The breakthrough came when Lisa learned about equanimity. She realized that her attempts to change Tom weren't coming from love. They were coming from her own anxiety about being different from him. She was trying to make him more like her, not because it would make him happier, but because it would make her more comfortable. Lisa began practicing loving Tom exactly as he was. She stopped pushing him toward activities that drained him. She started appreciating his quiet wisdom, his thoughtful nature, his preference for deep conversations over small talk. She learned to see his introversion not as something to fix, but as one of the qualities that had drawn her to him in the first place. The result was remarkable. When Tom felt accepted exactly as he was, he actually became more willing to step outside his comfort zone occasionally, not because he had to, but because he wanted to share some of Lisa's experiences. But more importantly, he began to relax into himself in a way that allowed his natural warmth and humor to emerge. This is the paradox of equanimity. When you stop trying to change someone, they often naturally begin to grow and expand in ways you never could have forced. These 4 pillars, loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity, work together to create a foundation for love that can weather any storm. They transform love from a feeling that comes and goes into a practice that deepens over time. But here's what's truly beautiful about these 4 pillars. They don't just benefit your relationship, they transform you. As you practice loving kindness, you become kinder. As you cultivate compassion, you become more compassionate. As you develop appreciative joy, you become more joyful. As you embody equanimity, you become more peaceful. And this transformation creates a beautiful cycle. The more you embody these qualities, the more your partner feels safe to embody them too. Love becomes not just something you feel for each other, but something you create together, something you practice together, something you become together. Pause with me here. Close your eyes and think about your own relationship. Which of these 4 pillars feels strongest in your love? Which feels weakest? Where might you begin to build? Remember, you don't have to perfect all 4 at once. Like building a physical structure, you can strengthen one pillar at a time. But know that as you do this work, you're not just improving your relationship, you're participating in an ancient practice of love that has been transforming hearts for over 2 millennia. This is the secret that can save any relationship. Love isn't just one thing. It's 4. And when all 4 pillars are strong, the temple of love you build together can withstand anything. Understanding these 4 pillars of love is one thing. Living them is another entirely. It's the difference between knowing how to swim and actually diving into the water. Between reading a recipe and tasting the meal. Between understanding music theory and feeling your heart move to a melody. The question isn't whether these ancient principles are true. They've proven their truth across millennia and countless relationships. The question is, how do you take these timeless wisdoms and weave them into the fabric of your daily life? How do you transform Monday morning arguments about who forgot to take out the trash into opportunities for loving kindness? How do you turn Friday night exhaustion into moments of compassion? How do you make the ordinary extraordinary through the practice of love? This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen through grand gestures or perfect moments. It happens in the small spaces between heartbeats, in the pause before you speak, in the choice you make when your partner is being difficult, in the way you look at them when they think no one is watching. Let me take you into the homes and hearts of people who have learned to live this way. Not perfect people. There are no perfect people. But ordinary human beings who have discovered that love, real love, is something you do rather than something you feel. Picture Maria and James on a Tuesday morning. They've been married for 8 years, and like most couples, they've fallen into patterns. James always runs late. Maria always worries about being punctual. Usually, this leads to tension, Maria feeling stressed and unheard, James feeling criticized and defensive. But something is different this particular Tuesday. As James searches frantically for his keys while Maria stands by the door checking her watch, she pauses. She takes a breath. She remembers the first pillar, metta, loving kindness. Instead of the familiar irritation rising in her chest, she feels something else, tenderness for this man who tries so hard at so many things, who just happens to have a different relationship with time than she does. "Hey," she says softly, walking over to him. "Let me help you look." She doesn't say it with martyred resignation or barely contained frustration. She says it with genuine care. "Where did you have them last?" James stops his frantic searching and looks at her, surprised. He was braced for the familiar tension, the unspoken or spoken criticism. Instead, he sees his wife's eyes soft with understanding. Something in his chest relaxes. "Thank you," he says, and means it in a way that goes far beyond the missing keys. They find the keys together. They were in yesterday's jacket pocket. But more importantly, they found something else, a moment of connection instead of conflict, of partnership instead of opposition. The morning that could have started with stress and distance instead begins with love. This is what transformation looks like. Not dramatic, not earth-shaking, just Maria choosing to respond from loving kindness instead of reacting from irritation. Just one moment, one choice, one breath between stimulus and response. But let's be honest, it's not always that simple. What about when your partner isn't just running late, but genuinely doing something that hurts or disappoints you? What about when loving kindness feels impossible because you're angry or hurt or exhausted? This is where the second pillar becomes essential: karuna, compassion. The willingness to stay present with pain, both your own and your partner's, without immediately trying to fix or change or escape it. Consider Rachel and David. They've been together for 12 years, and David has just confessed something that has shattered Rachel's trust. Not an affair, but a financial decision he made without consulting her, a significant purchase that affects both their futures, but was made from his fear and shame rather than their partnership. Rachel's first impulse is to rage, to punish, to make David feel as betrayed and afraid as she feels. These are natural responses, human responses. But Rachel has been learning about compassion, and she recognizes that beneath her anger is profound hurt. And beneath David's deception is profound fear. She doesn't bypass her anger. That would be spiritual bypassing, not compassion. Instead, she sits with it. She feels it fully. "I am so angry right now," she tells David. "And I'm hurt. And I'm scared about what this means for us." She speaks her truth without making David responsible for managing her emotions. Then she does something that surprises both of them. She looks at David, really looks at him, and beneath his defensive posture, she sees the man she loves in pain. She sees the shame in his eyes, the way his shoulders curve inward as if protecting himself from an expected blow. "Help me understand," she says. "What were you feeling that made this seem like the only choice?" It's not instant forgiveness. Forgiveness will come later, and it will be earned through David's actions, not just his words. It's not excusing or enabling. There will be consequences and new agreements and rebuilding of trust. But it's compassion. It's the radical choice to respond to the pain beneath the behavior, rather than just the behavior itself. What happens next is remarkable. When David feels seen in his shame, rather than simply punished for his choices, he's able to be truly honest for the first time. He tells Rachel about the fear that drove his decision, the shame he carries about money from his childhood, the way he felt frozen between disappointing her by spending and disappointing her by not providing what she wanted. It doesn't excuse what he did, but it explains it in a way that allows them to address the real problem instead of just the symptom. Rachel's compassion creates space for David's honesty, which creates space for real healing and change. This is the daily practice of compassion in relationship, the choice to respond to the human being you love, rather than just the behavior you don't like. The third pillar, mudita, appreciative joy, shows up in perhaps the most ordinary and extraordinary moments of daily life. It's there in the evening when your partner comes home excited about something that happened at work, and you have 30 seconds to choose. Will you genuinely share their excitement, or will some part of you remain focused on your own day, your own needs, your own experiences? Sarah discovered this choice on a Thursday evening when her husband Mark came home practically glowing. He'd been chosen to lead a project at work, something he'd been hoping for but hadn't expected. Sarah's first internal response was a complicated mix of happiness for him and worry for herself. This new project would mean longer hours, more travel, more responsibility for him. What would it mean for their already busy family life? But then she remembered Mudita. She looked at Mark's face, the boyish excitement there, the pride, the joy, and she made a choice. She chose to be happy because he was happy. Not later, after she'd figured out all the implications. Not conditionally, based on how it might affect her. Right now, in this moment, because the person she loves is experiencing joy. "Tell me everything," she said, and meant it. She set down her phone, turned her body toward him, and listened to his excitement with her whole attention. She asked questions about the project, about what it meant to him, about what he was most looking forward to. She celebrated him without reservation. Later, they would have practical conversations about schedules and responsibilities. Later, they would figure out how to make this new chapter work for both of them. But first, Sarah gave Mark the gift of pure celebration. She let his joy be simply joy, without immediately making it about anything else. The result was that Mark felt truly seen and supported by his wife. And Sarah discovered something beautiful. When you fully celebrate someone else's happiness, you become happier too. Joy, it turns out, multiplies when it's shared rather than diminishes. The fourth pillar, upekkha, equanimity, might be the most challenging to practice daily because it requires us to love without controlling, to care without managing, to be invested in our partner's well-being while allowing them complete autonomy over their choices. Tom learned this lesson through his relationship with his wife Janet's struggle with anxiety. For years, Tom had tried to help Janet with her anxiety by suggesting solutions, researching treatments, trying to create an environment where she wouldn't feel anxious. His intentions were loving, but the effect was that Janet felt constantly managed and judged. The more Tom tried to fix her anxiety, the more anxious she became, not just about her original worries, but about disappointing Tom with her lack of progress. Tom's breakthrough came when he learned about equanimity. He realized that his attempts to control Janet's anxiety were actually expressions of his own anxiety about her anxiety. He was trying to change her internal experience to manage his own discomfort with her pain. Learning equanimity meant that Tom had to do something counterintuitive. He had to stop trying to fix Janet's anxiety and start simply being present with her during anxious moments. When she was worried about their teenage daughter being out late, instead of immediately reassuring her that everything was fine, he would say, "I can see you're worried. That must be uncomfortable. I'm here with you." When she was anxious about social situations, instead of suggesting ways she could feel more confident, he would ask, "What do you need from me right now?" Sometimes she needed distraction. Sometimes she needed to talk through her worries. Sometimes she just needed him to sit quietly beside her while she worked through her feelings. The paradox of equanimity revealed itself. When Tom stopped trying to change Janet's anxiety, she felt safe enough to explore her own relationship with it. When she felt accepted exactly as she was, she naturally began to develop her own strategies for managing difficult emotions. The anxiety didn't disappear, but their relationship with it transformed completely. This is equanimity in daily life, loving someone enough to let them have their own experience, their own process, their own journey toward growth and healing. But how do these principles translate into the most mundane moments? How do you practice loving kindness when you're both tired and stressed and there are dishes in the sink and bills to pay and children to feed? How do you maintain compassion during the grocery store argument about which brand of pasta to buy? How do you find appreciative joy in your partner's enthusiasm for a hobby you don't understand? How do you practice equanimity when they make choices you wouldn't make? The answer lies in understanding that transformation doesn't happen in perfect moments. It happens in imperfect ones. It happens when it's difficult. It happens when you don't feel like it. Because that's when the practice matters most. Lisa and Robert discovered this during what they now call the Great Thermostat Wars of their first year living together. Lisa was always cold. Robert was always hot. Every evening became a subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, battle over the temperature of their apartment. Each adjustment of the thermostat felt like a small victory or defeat. Each compromise felt like sacrifice rather than love. The turning point came when they realized they were making the temperature about their relationship rather than simply about comfort preferences. They were taking each other's physical needs personally, as if Robert's warmth was a rejection of Lisa's coldness, as if Lisa's need for extra heat was criticism of Robert's tolerance for cool air. They learned to separate the practical problem from the emotional one. They bought a heated blanket for Lisa and a small fan for Robert. They stopped making thermostat adjustments about love and made them about logistics. They learned to laugh about their different metabolisms instead of fighting about them. Most importantly, they learned to practice all 4 pillars simultaneously in this small, daily challenge. Loving kindness, genuinely wanting each other to be comfortable. Compassion, recognizing that being too hot or too cold is actually uncomfortable, not just pickiness. Appreciative joy, celebrating the fact that they were together, sharing space, building a life that was warm and cool and everything in between. Equanimity, accepting that they would probably never experience temperature the same way, and that was perfectly fine. This might seem like a trivial example, but it's in these tiny, repeated interactions that the real work of love happens. Every couple has their version of the thermostat wars: dishes, punctuality, social preferences, money, family boundaries, weekend plans. The specific issue doesn't matter. What matters is learning to approach these differences as opportunities to practice love rather than evidence that you're incompatible. The transformation from conflict to connection often happens through what we might call the sacred pause, that moment between your partner's trigger and your response where you have a choice. In that pause lives all 4 pillars. In that pause, you can choose to respond from love rather than react from fear or anger or hurt. Michael and Andrea learned about the sacred pause during one of their recurring arguments about family visits. Andrea loved hosting family gatherings. Michael found them exhausting and stressful. For years, this difference led to the same pattern. Andrea would get excited about planning a family dinner. Michael would express reluctance. Andrea would feel hurt and unsupported. Michael would feel guilty and trapped, and they'd end up arguing about something that should have been a celebration. The breakthrough came when they learned to pause between trigger and response. When Andrea started excitedly planning the next family gathering, instead of immediately expressing his dread, Michael paused. In that pause, he remembered that Andrea's love for family was one of the things he loved about her. He remembered the joy on her face during these gatherings, even if they weren't his preferred way to spend time. He remembered the fourth pillar, equanimity, and how it teaches us to love without trying to change. "I can see how excited you are about having everyone over," he said. "Tell me what you're most looking forward to." Similarly, when Michael expressed his need for quiet time to recharge before and after family gatherings, instead of immediately interpreting this as rejection of her family, Andrea paused. In that pause, she remembered the second pillar, compassion, and how it asks us to respond to the need beneath the behavior. She remembered that Michael's introversion wasn't a character flaw or a rejection of her love. It was simply how he was designed. "What would help you feel more comfortable during the gathering?" she asked. Together, they created new patterns that honored both of their needs. They started planning smaller, shorter gatherings. They built in quiet time for Michael before guests arrived and after they left. Andrea learned to see Michael's needs not as obstacles to overcome, but as information to include in their planning. Michael learned to see Andrea's family love not as a burden to bear, but as a gift to appreciate. The gatherings became more enjoyable for both of them because they were no longer fighting against each other's nature but working with it. These daily transformations accumulate over time, creating relationships that feel fundamentally different from what most of us have experienced. They create marriages where conflict becomes curiosity, where differences become opportunities for understanding, where love becomes something you practice rather than something you feel. But perhaps most remarkably, these practices change the people doing them. As you practice loving kindness toward your partner, you become a more loving person. As you develop compassion for their struggles, you develop compassion for your own. As you celebrate their joys, you become more joyful. As you accept them as they are, you learn to accept yourself as you are. The transformation ripples outward into your relationships with children, friends, co-workers, strangers. The love you practice at home becomes the love you carry into the world. The patience you develop with your partner's quirks becomes patience with human nature itself. The forgiveness you learn to offer in your marriage becomes forgiveness you can offer to anyone who needs it. Take a moment now to think about your own daily interactions with your partner. Where do you feel the friction? Where do you find yourself reacting instead of responding? What would change if you approach these moments as opportunities to practice the four pillars rather than problems to solve? Remember, this isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming more loving. It's about transforming ordinary moments into opportunities for extraordinary connection. It's about discovering that the love you've been seeking in grand gestures and perfect circumstances has been available all along in the simple choice to respond with kindness rather than react with defense. This is the secret of transformation. Love isn't something that happens to you. It's something you do. And you can begin doing it differently, starting with your very next interaction. The question isn't whether your relationship can be transformed. The question is, are you ready to do the transforming? There's a moment that comes to every couple who begins this journey of conscious love, a moment when the initial enthusiasm fades and the reality of daily practice sets in. It's the moment when you realize that transformation isn't a destination you arrive at, but a path you choose to walk every single day for the rest of your life. This moment can feel daunting. After the honeymoon period of newfound awareness, when you've experienced those beautiful breakthroughs and felt the magic of responding with loving kindness instead of reacting with defensiveness. You wake up one morning and your partner does something that triggers you in exactly the old way. Your first impulse isn't compassion, it's irritation. Your first thought isn't, what pain might they be expressing, but why are they being so difficult? And in that moment, you have a choice that will determine whether this ancient wisdom becomes a passing phase or a lifelong practice that transforms not just your relationship, but who you are as a human being. Let me tell you about Elena and Marcus, who faced this exact moment 3 months into their journey with the 4 pillars. They had been so inspired by their early successes, the arguments that became conversations, the irritations that became opportunities for kindness, the way their home had begun to feel like a sanctuary rather than a battlefield. But then life happened. Marcus lost his job. Elena's mother became seriously ill. Their teenage daughter started struggling in school. The mortgage payment was late. The car broke down. And suddenly, all their beautiful practices felt impossible under the weight of real-world stress. I can't find my loving kindness when I'm terrified about paying the bills, Elena confessed to Marcus one night. I can't practice equanimity when everything feels like it's falling apart. Marcus nodded, feeling the same way. Maybe this stuff only works when life is easy, he said. Maybe we're not cut out for this. This is the crisis that every practitioner faces, the moment when you discover that loving kindness isn't just a nice idea for good times, but a practice that must be forged in the fire of real difficulty. It's the moment when you realize that the 4 pillars aren't meant to eliminate life's challenges, but to help you meet them with an open heart instead of a closed one. Elena and Marcus almost gave up that night. But something stopped them. Perhaps the memory of how good it had felt to love each other without defensiveness. Perhaps the recognition that their old patterns of dealing with stress had never actually worked. Instead of abandoning their practice, they decided to adapt it. They realized they had been approaching loving kindness as something extra to add to their lives, rather than a different way of being in their lives. When money was tight, instead of falling into blame and panic, they practiced the first pillar by being genuinely kind to themselves and each other about their fear. When Elena's mother was hospitalized, instead of Marcus trying to fix Elena's grief, he practiced the second pillar by simply being present with her pain. When their daughter was struggling, instead of comparing their family to other families, they practiced the third pillar by celebrating the small victories and the courage it took for their daughter to share her difficulties with them. Most importantly, they learned to practice the fourth pillar, equanimity, by accepting that life would always contain difficulties and that their love could be a constant even when everything else was changing. This is what it means to make love an eternal practice, understanding that the 4 pillars aren't conditional on circumstances. They're not something you do when you feel like it, or when life is cooperating. They're who you choose to become, regardless of what's happening around you. But how do you sustain this kind of practice over decades? How do you keep choosing love when the initial inspiration fades and the work becomes, well, work? The answer lies in understanding that sustainable practice isn't about perfection, it's about returning. Every spiritual tradition in the world recognizes this truth. The path isn't about never falling down, it's about getting back up. In meditation, when your mind wanders, you don't judge yourself for losing focus, you simply return your attention to the breath. In love, when you react instead of respond, you don't abandon the practice, you return to loving kindness as soon as you remember. Sarah and David discovered this after 5 years of practicing the 4 pillars. They had become quite skilled at loving each other consciously, but they still had moments, sometimes days, when they slipped back into old patterns. The difference was that these lapses no longer felt like failures. They felt like reminders. "I notice I've been trying to control your schedule again," Sarah would say to David. "I'm remembering equanimity now." Or David would catch himself being impatient with Sarah's processing style and say, "I'm choosing compassion again. Help me understand what you need." They learned that the practice wasn't about being perfect lovers, but about being conscious ones. About catching themselves in unconscious patterns and choosing to return to love over and over again. This returning is what makes love eternal. Not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of commitment to love through difficulty. Not the elimination of human imperfection, but the willingness to extend grace to that imperfection in yourself and your partner. As your practice deepens over the years, something beautiful begins to happen. The 4 pillars stop being something you do and start being something you are. Loving kindness becomes as natural as breathing. Compassion becomes your default response to suffering. Joy in your partner's happiness becomes automatic. Equanimity becomes the steady ground from which you meet whatever life brings. But perhaps the most profound transformation is how this practice begins to ripple outward from your relationship into every aspect of your life. The patience you develop with your partner's quirks becomes patience with the slow driver in front of you. The compassion you learn to offer during difficult conversations at home becomes compassion you can offer to a struggling coworker. The loving kindness you practice in your marriage becomes loving kindness you extend to yourself when you make mistakes. Consider the story of James and Patricia, who had been practicing conscious love for 10 years when their neighbor's teenage son was arrested for vandalism. The entire neighborhood was buzzing with judgment and outrage. "These kids today," people muttered. "Where are the parents?" The boy's family became pariahs, isolated in their shame and fear. But James and Patricia responded differently. Years of practicing mudita, appreciative joy, had taught them to look for the good in difficult situations. Years of practicing karuna, compassion, had taught them to see pain behind destructive behavior. Instead of joining the chorus of judgment, they knocked on their neighbor's door with a casserole and a simple message: "We're here if you need anything." That simple act of loving kindness, extended not because it was required, but because it had become who they were, began to shift the entire dynamic in their neighborhood. Other families began to remember their own teenagers' difficult moments. The boy's parents felt supported instead of shamed. The boy himself, feeling the weight of genuine care rather than just consequence, began to take responsibility for his actions in a way that shame never could have produced. This is how love saves the world, not through grand gestures or perfect people, but through ordinary humans who have learned to respond to life with open hearts. Every marriage that becomes a practice of loving kindness creates a ripple effect that extends far beyond the couple themselves. Your children, if you have them, learn what love looks like not from what you tell them, but from what they witness between you. When they see 2 people who can disagree without attacking, who can be different without being threatened, who can face difficulties without abandoning each other. They carry that template into their own relationships. The love you practice today becomes the love they'll be capable of tomorrow. Your friends notice when your relationship becomes a source of joy rather than drama. They begin to ask questions. How do you two stay so connected? What's your secret? And you find yourself sharing not relationship advice, but wisdom about the nature of love itself. You become a quiet teacher, not through preaching, but through example. Your workplace changes when you bring the skills you've learned at home into your professional relationships. The ability to see past surface behavior to underlying needs makes you a better colleague, a more effective leader, a more compassionate team member. The equanimity you've developed in your marriage helps you stay centered during workplace conflicts. The loving kindness you practice at home becomes kindness you can offer to anyone who crosses your path. But sustaining this eternal practice requires more than individual commitment. It requires community. Just as it's easier to maintain a fitness routine when you have workout partners, it's easier to maintain conscious love when you have others on the same path. This doesn't mean you need to find other couples practicing exactly the same techniques you are. It means surrounding yourself with people who value growth, who believe in the possibility of conscious relationship, who support your commitment to love over convenience. Sometimes this community forms naturally. You attract friends who are also working on becoming more loving humans. Sometimes you need to seek it out, joining groups, attending workshops, finding mentors who can guide you when the path becomes unclear. Sometimes you create it yourself, becoming the couple that others look to for inspiration and guidance. Elena and Marcus, whom we met earlier, eventually started hosting monthly gatherings in their home for couples who wanted to explore conscious relationship. It began simply, just a few friends sharing their struggles and successes over dinner. But it grew into something beautiful, a community of people supporting each other's commitment to love. We're not relationship experts, Elena would always say at the beginning of each gathering. We're just people who believe love is worth practicing, and we practice better together than alone. These gatherings became a source of strength for everyone involved. When couples hit rough patches, they had a community to turn to, not for advice about whether to stay or go, but for support in staying conscious whatever they chose. When couples celebrated breakthroughs, they had people who understood the significance of choosing compassion over criticism, of responding with love instead of reacting with fear. The eternal practice also requires you to regularly renew your commitment, not just to your partner, but to the practice itself. Just as couples renew their wedding vows, conscious couples need to renew their commitment to growth, to awareness, to choosing love over comfort. This might happen formally, setting aside time each year to reflect on your journey together, to acknowledge how far you've come and set intentions for where you want to go. It might happen informally, recognizing moments when you've grown, celebrating the times you responded with love when your old pattern would have been defensiveness. For some couples, this renewal involves returning to the practices that first opened their hearts, rereading meaningful books, attending workshops, working with teachers or therapists who support conscious relationship. For others, it involves deepening their individual spiritual practices, recognizing that the health of the relationship depends on the health of the individuals within it. The key is understanding that just as physical health requires ongoing attention, regular exercise, good nutrition, adequate rest, emotional and spiritual health requires ongoing practice. You don't graduate from loving kindness any more than you graduate from physical fitness. It's a lifetime commitment to showing up, to growing, to choosing love again and again. As you walk this eternal path together, you may begin to notice something remarkable. Your relationship becomes a spiritual practice in itself. Not spiritual in a religious sense necessarily, but spiritual in the deepest sense, a way of touching something sacred through the intimate work of learning to love another human being completely. Through the daily practice of the 4 pillars, you learn to see the divine in the mundane. You find the sacred in washing dishes together, in having difficult conversations, in choosing kindness when you feel defensive. You discover that the deepest spiritual truths aren't found in mountaintop experiences, but in kitchen table moments of choosing love over fear. Your relationship becomes a laboratory for transformation, a place where you discover who you really are beneath all your defenses and conditioning. Your partner becomes not just someone you love, but someone who helps you become the most loving version of yourself. Their very presence in your life becomes a gift that keeps giving, the gift of endless opportunities to practice compassion, patience, forgiveness, and joy. This is the ultimate promise of the eternal practice, that through learning to love one person consciously, you learn to love life itself consciously. Through practicing the 4 pillars in your most intimate relationship, you develop the capacity to meet whatever life brings with an open heart. And in the end, perhaps this is the secret that can save not just your marriage, but contribute to saving our world, one relationship at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of loving kindness at a time. We transform not just our own lives, but the very fabric of human connection. The practice is eternal because love is eternal. Not as a feeling that comes and goes, but as a choice that's always available. Right here. Right now. In this very moment, with this very person who sits before you, flawed and beautiful and human, offering you the greatest gift possible, the opportunity to love consciously. Your eternal practice begins with your next breath, your next word, your next choice to respond with love instead of react with fear. The journey of 1,000 years starts with a single step. The transformation of a lifetime starts with a single moment of loving kindness. Will you take that step? Will you choose that moment? Will you make love your eternal practice? The choice, as always, is yours.